those of you who know my work realize that I would almost never go to an event with the word open in its title. There are already too many people who mistakenly believe I'm a supporter of, quote, open source, unquote. I do, however, support open windows, especially in a room that's hot. A lot of those windows are closed. Could people please open them? It won't be enough, but it will at least help a bit. It's really painful in here. Ah, good. With some on the other side, maybe there's something behind. Yes. Wow. If someone could move this aside and open that window too, and maybe a few over here, we might get some air circulating. It might be livable in here. So, to explain why I don't support making things open, I better tell you briefly what free software means. First of all, it's free. It's software that respects your freedom and your community. So it's free as in freedom. We're not talking about price. Price is a side issue. It's just a detail, not ethically important, whereas freedom is as important as anything can be. So if you're going to say it in German, you would say freie, not kostenlos. Take advantage of other languages when they are more clear than English to express this distinction. In English, I have to say, think of free speech, not free beer, to understand the word free when it appears in free software. So free software respects your freedom and your community. When a program is not free, we call it non-free software, proprietary software, user subjugating software, because a non-free program creates a system of digital colonization. It keeps people divided and helpless. You know, that's the standard policy of colonial systems, divide and rule. Well, that's what non-free software does. It keeps the users divided because they're forbidden to redistribute it. And it keeps the users helpless because they don't have the source code, so they can't change it, and they can't even tell what it really does to them. So it's a system of unjust power, and that's why it should not exist. If you use a non-free program, as this event is using Windows to run this display, well, Windows is a collection of non-free programs. That means you have given the developers of those programs power over you. You shouldn't ever do that. Because with software, there are just two possibilities ultimately. Either the users control the program, or the program controls the users. Free software is the first case, proprietary software is the second. If the users have sufficient freedom, then they effectively have control over the software they're using. And if they don't have sufficient freedom, then it's the program that has control over the users, and the developer or the owner has control over the program. So really that program is just an instrument of that developer's control over the users. And that's what creates the system of unjust power. So what freedom do users need to effectively control the software and control the computing that they do with the software? There are 4 essential freedoms, and they define free software. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program as you wish. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the source code of the program and change it to make it do your computing the way you wish. Freedom 2 is the freedom to help others. That's the freedom to redistribute exact copies of the program to others when you wish. And freedom 3 is the freedom to contribute to your community. That's the freedom to make and distribute copies of your modified versions when you wish. All four of these freedoms apply to all areas of life. That is, for the program to be free, they must apply to all areas of life, including commercial activities. And none of them is an obligation. You should be free to do these things, but that doesn't mean you're required to do these things, and you shouldn't be required to do them. The point is, with free software, you're free to do them if you wish, and with proprietary software, you're not free to do them if you wish. So, when a program carries these four freedoms adequately, then it's free software because the social system of its distribution and use is an ethical system that respects freedom and community. But if any of these freedoms is missing or insufficient, then the program is proprietary because it imposes an unjust social system on its users. So the distinction between free software and proprietary software is not a technical distinction. It's not directly a question of what jobs the program does, although there's a relation. You're likely to find malicious features in proprietary software, and it's very rare in free software. It's not directly about how the program works, and it's not directly about how the code was written. You might find more people collaborating and writing a free program, but that's not what makes it free. Really, it's not directly relevant how the code was written, as long as it respects our freedom when we get it. So, instead of a technical distinction, this is an ethical, social, and political distinction, which is what makes it so important. More important than any mere technical distinction could possibly be. So the use of a free program in society is a good thing. It's development. The use of a proprietary program is not development because it's dependence. To write and so it's a social problem that we should try to eliminate. To write a free program is a contribution to society, more or less. How much of a contribution depends on the details. To write a proprietary program is not a contribution, it's a power grab. Because in social terms, that program is a trap. If it has attractive features, those are the bait for the trap. Their purpose is to attract people to give up their freedom and become users of the program. So they don't make it better, they make it more dangerous to our freedom. They make it a more harmful attack. So if you have the choice to write a non-free program or do nothing at all, it's better to do nothing at all because that doesn't do harm. Thus, the goal of the free software movement is that all software be free so that all users of software can be free. Now, in a normal free software speech, which takes longer than this, then I would go into the specific reasons for each of these four freedoms. I won't do that, but I will point out some of the malicious things that non-free programs do. For instance, to forbid people to share copies of the program, to ban redistribution, essentially puts each user into a potential moral dilemma. What will I do if my good friend asks for a copy? To avoid this moral dilemma, you should not have the program. And that's why my way of avoiding the dilemma. I reject those programs. If someone offered me a program without freedom to, in other words, on the condition that I not share it with you, I say, My conscience does not permit me to accept those conditions, so take your nasty program out of here. And that's what you should say too. And if they call people who share pirates, don't repeat their terminology. That's just propaganda for their war on sharing, which is fundamentally evil. So if someone asks me what I think of piracy, I say attacking ships is very bad. If someone asks me what I think of music piracy, I say, from what I've read, when pirates attack, they don't do it by playing instruments very loud and badly. They use arms instead. So it isn't music piracy. There are programs whose licenses restrict what you can do with them. For instance, there's a proprietary program for running websites whose license says users are not allowed to use it to publish anything that criticizes the developer. In this case, non-free software literally takes away the user's freedom of speech. Now, when users can't study and change the source code, the program is likely to have malicious features. Broadly speaking, there are three kinds of malicious features. There are the features to spy on the user, the features to restrict the user, and there are backdoors. Now, finding these in proprietary software is very common. One proprietary package that has all three, and I'm talking about known specific malicious features that you may have heard of, is called Microsoft Windows. People have found spy features that send data about the use of the machine to a server. Of course, you can see the digital handcuffs, the features designed specifically to stop users from doing things that would be natural to implement. That is, restrict what users can do with the data they have in their own computers. The backdoors are not so easy to find, but a couple of them are known in Windows. One of them gives Microsoft the power to impose changes in the software without asking permission of the nominal owner of the computer. Nominal because once Microsoft has Windows running in that computer, Microsoft has owned that computer. So Windows is not just malware, it's universal malware. It's comparable to a botnet that allows anything whatsoever to be remotely installed for whatever malicious purpose there might be. People have a strange practice. They don't judge the software that people know is installed by the same criteria that they apply to things such as viruses. If they did, they would recognize that a lot of proprietary software is malware, including Windows, and also the Macintosh system, which has features to restrict the user, and of course the iPhone and the iPad are even worse because they have known spy features, which is why people started talking about the spy phone a couple of months ago. And they have features to restrict the user even in regard to what applications she can install, going farther than Microsoft ever dared to go with Windows. And then there's the back door that allows Apple to remotely delete applications. So they have all three kinds of malicious features. The software, and I think that's one of them, is malware. Then there is Flash Player, which is gratis, but it's not free software. And it has features to spy for surveillance. I don't think it does the spying directly, but it helps websites do surveillance on the user. And it also has features to restrict the user, digital restrictions management, DRM. Then there is the Amazon swindle. a so-called ebook reader, which is designed to take away the traditional freedoms of readers. There is, for instance, the freedom to acquire a book anonymously paying cash. Most well-known books that are in print are only available for the swindle from Amazon. And Amazon makes users identify themselves. So Amazon has a list of all the books that each user has read. But not me, because I never identify myself in connection with identifying any book I'm acquiring. Not from a store, that is. From, if you personally are giving me a book, well, then you know what book you gave me. But you presumably are not putting that in a gigantic database that Big Brother can collect at any time. Whereas Amazon is, under the so-called Patriot Act, the US government can collect that information from Amazon without even a court order. I could give you more examples, but these are enough. So really nasty things happen to people who use non-free software, and they are the rule, not the exception. And the only defense that we have against malware, against malicious features, specifically in the software that we know we're using, is if it's free software. Because among the users, some of them will be programmers, and sometimes they'll read the source code, perhaps because they're thinking of adding a feature. And if there's a malicious feature in there, they have a chance to spot it. And if they spot it, then they can fix it. With proprietary software, they can't look at the code. They don't have a chance to spot it except through clever experimentation or if it happens to show itself. Oh, I forgot to tell you all the freedoms that the swindle tries to swindle us out of. There's also the freedom to give or lend or sell a book to someone else. There's a kind of ersatz lending, which isn't really lending, and it's basically bullshit to call it that, but they don't pretend that you can give a book to someone else or sell it to someone else. You just can't. They achieve this with digital handcuffs and with contracts that say that the user doesn't really own the book. They have total contempt for private property. They don't believe in it. They say all the copies, all your books belong to us. And then there's the freedom to keep the book as long as you wish, and eventually pass it on to your heirs. Amazon eliminates that with a back door. We know about this back door through observation, since we can't check the source code. But people saw Amazon deleting books. Amazon deleted thousands of copies of a particular book in 2009. And these were authorized copies. People had acquired them directly from Amazon, and therefore Amazon knew exactly where they were, exactly where to send the command to delete them. And the book that Amazon deleted, demonstrating the Orwellian nature of this product, was 1984 by George Orwell. As you could imagine, there was a lot of criticism of Amazon, and Amazon then said, "We'll never do this again unless ordered to by the state." Very comforting. But that might actually happen. A few years ago, J.K. Rowling and her publisher got an injunction against people in Canada who had bought some of her books in the bookstore, except the bookstore was selling them by mistake. It wasn't supposed to put the books on sale yet. So the injunction ordered these people not to read their books. My response to this is a boycott of Harry Potter. I don't say you shouldn't read the books. I leave that to the author. I only say you shouldn't buy them. In any case, if those books had been distributed on the swindle, it's entirely plausible that the injunction would have told Amazon or whoever sold them to delete them. They couldn't do that with the physical books because the bookstore didn't know who had bought those books and had no way to make their physical copies disappear. But if they were ebooks set up as in the swindle, that's what would happen, I think. Can we be sure it wouldn't? So we must not tolerate the existence of such a backdoor. So we defend against these features through our community. The users who are programmers have a chance to detect and fix malicious features, and then they can publish their modified versions and say, look at this scandal, I found this horrible malicious feature in such and such program, here's the improved version which doesn't have the malicious feature, I deleted that code. And not only can they say this, but everyone else will be able to verify it's true just by comparing. And not only that, but most projects, most free software projects keep records of who put in each piece of code, so they'll know who put this in, and that person will get the blame. So the community has a defense. It's not perfect. We're not guaranteed to spot a malicious feature, but it's somewhat of a defense, and it's the only defense ever known. With proprietary software, there's no defense. So the users are simply at the mercy of the developers. So if you want to live in freedom and use computers, you've got to make sure that all the software you're using is free. Any non-free, and I'm not just saying this because I believe in going 100% of the way. Any non-free program takes away your freedom if you're using it. So if you want not to have your freedom taken away, you've got to reject all the non-free programs and use only free software. In my computer, I have only free software installed. I chose this computer because even the BIOS is free. So that's the free software movement. To make use of free software a real possibility, rather than just an imaginary ideal, I launched the Gnu Project, the project to develop a free operating system that is an operating system made up entirely of free software, and the system is called GNU. So, oops. Oh, thanks. So this is a GNU. The fact that the word, when it's the name of our system, GNU stands for GNU's Not Unix. So it's a recursive acronym. But the reason it's a joke is that the GNU is a word, and it's the name of this animal which lives in Africa. And I'm going to auction this adorable GNU at the end of the talk on behalf of the Free Software Foundation. In any case, when the GNU system was almost complete and just one component was missing, namely the kernel, in 1992, Mr. Torvalds, who had a proprietary kernel called Linux, freed it by releasing it under the GNU General Public License, or GNU GPL for short. Now, the GNU GPL was one of many free software licenses, so it's not the only one. There are people who mistakenly believe that being free software means being under a GNU license, but that's not true. The two different BSD licenses are both free licenses. The Apache license is a free license. There are a lot of free software licenses. Even at that time, there were other free software licenses. But anyway, the GNU GPL was one of them. So when Linux was released that way, it became free software. So the GNU system plus the kernel Linux was a complete system that was entirely free software. For the first time, you could buy a new PC and run it in freedom. However, the people who combined this missing this one last piece, well, one last necessary piece, we've added thousands more since then, with the existing components of the GNU system, they were focused so much on this one piece, Linux, that they started calling the combination the Linux system. In effect, they treated the bulk of the system as a minor add-on to Linux. And they started giving us none of the credit for our work, which isn't nice. So please call the system GNU plus Linux or GNU/Linux. Please give us equal mention. I think we deserve that much. Anyway, during the 90s, the system gained popularity among techies who noticed it was powerful, reliable, flexible, efficient, and also you didn't have to pay for a license to run it. So it had various practical advantages, and it started to catch on. But most of those people had never heard the ideas of freedom and community that are the basis of the free software movement. So there were two political camps in the free software community. There was the free software movement, those of us who were doing this for freedom and wanted freedom. And then there was the other camp of people such as Mr. Torvalds, who don't care about these freedoms, and they only regard it as an issue of practical convenience. And when they talk about the subject, they only cite practical convenience values. So there was a debate between these two camps for several years. And then the people in the other camp coined the term open source as a way they could stop using the word free and stop mentioning these ethical issues that for us are the principal issue, are the principal point here. So they constructed a totally different discourse, one that doesn't criticize proprietary software as unjust, which doesn't present this as an issue of the ethical and unethical way to do things, good and evil. Instead, they recommend a development methodology saying that it will typically lead to better quality code. Well, if that's true, it's a nice bonus, but that's all it is, because our freedom is really important, and better quality code is just nice. However, since they were the majority of the community and the businesses mostly joined them, because the businesses in the free software community mostly were also involved in distributing proprietary software products and didn't want to support a philosophy that says those proprietary software products are an injustice, they started saying open source. The politicians and journalists mostly followed the money. So since then, what happens? Most people who talk about our work call it open source. I frequently have seen well, not all that frequently, but many times I've seen articles calling me the father of open source. And when I see them, I send a letter to the editor saying, if I'm the father of open source, it was conceived through artificial insemination, using stolen sperm, without my knowledge or consent. Then I go on to explain the ideas of the free software movement, and that the free software movement is what really built this system and this community, most of it at least, of the system. And that's the whole point. You see, I want the people who read that article and were misinformed about why we're doing this and what's at stake to get the information about the free software movement, about the real reason for developing the system, which in fact is basically GNU. And you can help doing this. You could help us do this by talking about free rather than open as much as possible. But I make an exception for open data because there it's not another way of talking. It's not just a way of avoiding talking about free. It really is a totally different kind of issue. And I think that for that issue, it really is about the openness or transparency of the state. It's not directly an issue of freedom. So I wouldn't suggest calling it free data. I mean, maybe there is some issue about whether data is free, but it's a totally different kind of issue. So I think open government data seems like the right name for the issue it's talking about. So how does that relate to free software? I must admit I had to work a bit to find a relationship, but there is one. I warned them about this when they invited me, but basically, in order to be able to use the open government data as a free citizen, it has to be operable on with free software. That's absolutely crucial, because if the data formats are an obstacle to use of free software, then you can't use that data in freedom. So what are the possible obstacles? Well, a secret format is obviously one of them. And there are government-funded entities that, entities specifically set up by the state that distribute data in this way, especially if the data is video. For instance, Italian public television distributes video in a secret format called VC1. And the reason it's secret is for the sake of malicious features. Features to restrict what the users can do with this data when it arrives in their computers. Well, this is an injustice. This should be illegal. I believe the BBC also distributes in formats that are secret and designed to restrict people, but I'm not sure what's happened in the past few years. And that shouldn't be allowed either, since the BBC is specially set up by the state and has certain privileges. Now, another thing that can interfere with the use of the data is if it's in a patented format. And I don't know about patented formats for semantic data, but there are certainly patented formats for audio, such as MP3, and patented formats for video, such as the MPEG formats. And there's also something which is almost like being secret. It's the case of Flash. Now, the format of Flash is not secret except for the optional digital restrictions management, which I suppose must be secret. But it's not implemented by free software because Adobe keeps changing it faster than we have been able to catch up with. So Ganesh, the free Flash player, more or less handles Flash version 8, but now there's Flash version 10 with a totally different virtual machine, which means basically starting from scratch. So it's not good to distribute data in a way that requires people to run Flash. And of course, it's also not good to make people use any non-free JavaScript to access the site, because that's making them run non-free software. And states must never require the public to run non-free software to communicate with them. That's direct contempt for the freedom of the public. Now, someone who wasn't Larry Lessig said that code is law. This is not always true. If the code is free software and you control your copy, then it's not law. That's why software should be free, because otherwise the code is law. It has power over you the way a law would have, and there's no reason why it should. And so we shouldn't do things that way. We should reject non-free software. However, we can't avoid having the law be law. There's no way we could each write and live by our own copy of laws, except in a solipsistic virtual universe. And that wouldn't be much fun because none of us would have any company in them. So states inevitably have power over people, and this makes them very dangerous, especially when they cease to be democratic, as our states mostly have done. They're under the power of business more than the power of their citizens. Greece is a very good example at this moment, but it's not alone. I mean, look at the US and the UK, which launched an invasion of Iraq based on lies, and gradually the evidence has come out about how they constructed the false intelligence reports to provide dishonest supposed justification for this war of aggression. And yet, the people who launched this war are not facing warrants to be sent to The Hague and tried for the crime that that people were executed for after World War II, the crime of aggressive war. They should go on trial, but these regimes are too powerful. So we need to keep our governments more in check. They're too powerful and out of control. They're rogue states. Well, open data is one way that we can start to keep them in check. We may have to apply in some way open data principles to intelligence agencies to stop them from being used to put us into unjust wars. There are also specific kinds of data that governments produce and fund that require certain kinds of distribution. Of course, open data needs to be released under free licenses if there is any kind of law that would otherwise restrict them. If it's copyrightable, or in Europe with the absurd database copyright scheme, well, they've got to be licensed in such a way as to give people the four freedoms in using this data. But this applies to certain kinds of works which are not part of what you'd usually consider the open data, but they're data, and they come directly or indirectly from governments. For instance, there is scientific papers. Scientific papers are mostly funded by governments because they fund the researchers. They fund the making of the work that it includes the writing of the papers. So these must be published in a way that permits redistribution. I don't advocate permitting modification of these papers because these papers are works of testimony of their authors, and changing their testimony would not be right. But redistribution must be allowed. In other words, we must put an end to the power that the journal publishers have, the stranglehold over access to scientific information. Now, when the term open access was first proposed, well, I don't know if it was first proposed, but at least at the time of the Budapest Declaration, about 10 years ago, it was defined to mean both that anybody could get the papers from the main publication site and that everyone was allowed to redistribute copies. The second point is the crucial one. Because once everybody's allowed to redistribute copies, you can count on the world's universities, librarians, to organize mirror sites and make them available to everyone. So in fact, the first point in practice would follow from the second. You don't really need to demand the first point, because once you've got the second point, you can just do the first point. So it's the freedom to redistribute that really matters. But the term open access encourages people to focus mainly on the first point. So eventually the people campaigning for that drop the more important second point, which is why I can't support open access anymore. We've got to campaign for freely redistributable publication. Another kind of work that is to a large extent funded by governments is educational works, because school textbooks are basically funded by governments, and these governments should insist and require that these textbooks be free. Not necessarily gratis, but free. Because all educational works should be free, because they are works that you use to do a practical job, just as software is. And the reasons, which I didn't fully state today, why software should be free, apply to any work that you use in your life to do practical jobs. Users deserve, well, freedom is having control of your own life. And if you're using a work to do a job in your life, that means you have to have control over that work. But if you change the work to do the job better for you, that means you should be able to publish your version, because it may be good for other people too. But once you allow people to publish modified versions of a work, it's absurd to stop them from republishing without changes, because that just requires them to make some changes that don't really alter anything important, so that they can be allowed to publish. So the four freedoms are necessary for these works. Now, for more information about free software, I recommend the site gnu.org. There is also the Free Software Foundation at fsf.org. And there is the Free Software Foundation of Europe at fsfeurope.org. Here's the president, Karsten Gerloff. So you could talk with him about helping or joining FSF Europe.
That would be great. We have a booth downstairs. You're very welcome to drop by and chat. Thanks for
So now it's time, to tell you that I have some buttons and pins and key rings from the Free Software Foundation that are for sale. We'll find some place for me to sit and sell them, and please buy some and support us. And there are stickers over there which are gratis, so you could take them, and please put them in permanent places. Don't waste them by putting them on your clothing today. So now the auction of the GNU. This is an adorable GNU that needs a home. If you have a penguin, then you need to get a GNU, because, as we all know, a penguin can't hardly function without a GNU. If you are the buyer, I will be glad to sign the card for you. We can accept payment in cash or with credit cards. And when you bid, please wave your arm and shout the quantity, because you want me to notice, right? What use is bidding if I don't notice? So I'm going to start with 20 euros. Do I get 20 euros? Okay, I've got 20. Do I get 25? How much?
30.
I've got 30. Do I get 35? I've got 35. Do I get 40? How much?
45.
I've got 45. How much?
50.
I've got 50. Do I get 55? I've got 50. Do I get 55? How much?
$100.
$100. How many euros is that? I can accept dollars, but I need to know how many euros it is in order for the auction to proceed. Okay, let's call it 70. Okay, so I've got 70 euros. Do I get 80? I've got 80. Do I get 80? Do I get 90? I've got 80. I've got 100? 100 euros. I've got 100 euros. Do I get 110? I've got 100 euros. Do I get 110? Do I get 110 euros for this adorable GNU that needs a home? Do I get 110 euros to the Free Software Foundation to defend your freedom? Do I get 110? Do I get 110? Last chance to bid 110 or more. Last chance. Do I get 110? Going.
You get 110.
Oh, he outbid himself. So, do I get 120? Look, this is an auction. What else am I going to do? Do I get 120? Do I get 120? Last chance to bid 120 or more. Going. Gone for 110. So, I'm going to have a question and answer session in another room. To enable us to get back on schedule, I will finish now and go to the other room. And there I will also sell the pins and keyrings and
Thank you, Richard.
buttons.
And the other room is just across the hall in Workshop 1. Just